Britain's Special Air Service Regiment, the SAS, is the most famous elite force in the world. It has always been at the sharp end, dropping behind enemy lines, destroying enemy installations, spotting targets, bringing in tremendous firepower. But the birth of the SAS was far from certain. The regiment was the brainchild of a remarkable young junior officer, Second Lieutenant David Stirling, who broke all the rules to create it.
From the start, we knew we would never make it to a regiment unless not only did we operate it effectively, but we succeeded in establishing a new role.
In autumn 1941, German General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps was winning the war in North Africa. His aircraft and tanks were pushing the British back towards Egypt. But one man had an idea to help slow the Desert Fox. 24-year-old David Stirling, the maverick youngest son of a Scottish laird. Sent down from Cambridge University, first he wanted to be an artist, then he trained to climb Mount Everest. He was a risk-taker and gambler. When war came, he joined the Brigade of Guards Commando. With training completed, he was sent to the Middle East as part of Lay Force. On the voyage, Stirling travelled with the author Evelyn Waugh, who noted that he was a gentleman obsessed with the pleasures of chance. It was this flair for risk-taking and gambling, his belief that who dares wins, that would fuel Stirling's later adventures. During 1941 in North Africa, Lay Force was involved in several raids. It was then disbanded and the men sent to other units. Stirling was growing impatient to engage the enemy. He took part in an unofficial parachute jump, but this went badly wrong.
When I jumped, I must have gone very horizontal in the slipstream, because my parachute, when it opened, was attached to the tailplane, and before it broke loose, it took off a panel or two of the parachute. And therefore it kept, fortunately, the canopy, the shape of it. But obviously it let a lot more air through, so I descended a good deal faster than my companions.
Stirling was seriously injured, but it was in hospital, half paralyzed, that he devised the concept of the SAS. He became convinced that small groups of highly trained men could cause havoc behind enemy lines. In hospital, one of the few people Stirling trusted enough to discuss his new idea with was Brigadier Dudley Clark. Clark was already running disinformation operations, one of which involved dropping dummy paratroops to trick the enemy into believing that the British had airborne forces in North Africa. The Germans had already shown the effectiveness of paratroops during their invasion of Crete. The British were eager to follow suit. But in England, the first units were only just training. In return for Clark's support, Stirling the politician built a parachute unit into his revolutionary proposal. But Stirling the realist knew that he faced an uphill struggle to sell the idea to the military establishment.
But by and large, there was a kind of core of mediocrity which wanted to defend itself against having to make things more difficult for their day-to-day administration.
Stirling argued that the SAS could be immensely cost-effective, 100 men used in a traditional commando role could attack one target. Divided into 4-man SAS units, they could attack 25. Still on crutches, Sterling took the plan to Middle East headquarters in Cairo. He didn't have a pass and was refused entry. Instead, he climbed the perimeter fence using his crutches as a ladder. The guards saw him and gave chase, but he managed to bolt into an office. By incredible good luck, it belonged to the Deputy Chief of Staff, General Neil Ritchie, who read his pencil-scrawled notes with interest. The idea was passed on to the Commander-in-Chief in the Middle East, General Claude Auchinleck. It was approved, and Sterling was given the official go-ahead to raise just 65 men and officers. The name Sterling selected for his actual unit was based on that of Clark's fictitious force, L Detachment, 1st Special Air Service Brigade. The title was deliberately calculated to give the enemy the impression that the British had a substantial airborne presence in Egypt. Sterling was happy to play along with Dudley Clark's ruse so long as he got his unit. Despite being supposedly secret, the early SAS was featured on film and in a set of official photographs. But Sterling was determined to prove that the SAS was more than just a clever illusion. The training would be rigorous and different. He needed a special sort of soldier and went back to the men he had fought alongside in the Guards Commando. Most of them were still in the camps in the Middle East to which they had been sent after Lay Force had been disbanded. Sterling also knew which officers he wanted. The first was this man, Captain Paddy Mayne. Before the war, Mayne's reputation was as an Irish international rugby player. Now, it was as a fighting soldier. He had operated with Number 11 Commando, but when Sterling went to recruit him, he was in prison.
Well, Paddy, I knew quite well from Lay Force. He had already undertaken a very good operation, a very well-conducted operation in the Lebanon, in Syria rather. And but after it was over, he found reason to knock out his commanding officer and was doing time in the jail at Geneva. After being under close arrest for a time, I think he was awaiting a court-martial. Anyway, he was inside. But I told him that very firmly this commanding officer wasn't for hitting. And he always subsequently honored that commitment.
Mayne made a lasting impression on another original member of the SAS, Bob Bennett.
Paddy, who was a man that if you walked behind, you had no fear at all. If you were with Paddy Mayne, there was no fear at all. He could take on anything.
Jock Lewis, another officer Sterling was determined to recruit for his early SAS, appeared a very different character. Apparently quiet and studious, Lewis had been at Oxford University before the war, but Sterling knew that there was another side to his character. It was Lewis who devised the SAS's training methods and led the way in trying them out. Reg Seekings was another of the original volunteers for the SAS. A tough and outstanding amateur boxer from East Anglia, he remembers Lewis's style of leadership.
And I think everybody will agree, the finest training man that training officer has ever been known, or ever will know. He was an absolute genuine man. And the great thing again with him, he led by example. If he had ideas, he tried them out himself first. He never did a thing that he wouldn't do himself, never asked us to do a thing that he wouldn't do himself. And he set the example all the time, so what could you do? He jumps off a truck at 40 miles an hour, and he asks you to jump off at 30. You just did it. You couldn't argue, you can't argue against people like that. And when we were sleeping, There was him planning the next day's operations or the next week's training program. He's a terrific personality.
Bob Bennett was equally impressed.
One of the hardest people I've met. He could march for days with no water, and his training was absolutely thorough. And he did the parachute training, the ground training for the parachute, and it was coming up. Even to the extent that they had 1,500 weight trucks. We started off jumping off of platforms about 12 foot, 16 foot, and learning how to roll. And then he had this great idea of jumping on a 1,500 weight truck and facing out to the back of it, doing about 30, 35 miles an hour, and everyone had to jump out. And there was so many people got hurt that was stopped straight away. But getting back to other training, the marches we were doing were very, very severe, with limited rations. And it all finished up with a march from Cabrit to Cairo, which was about 100 miles, right across the desert, no roads whatsoever.
In traditional army units, only officers made decisions. As Seekings describes, Stirling's SAS was very different.
And people like David Stirling, Paddy Mayne, they gave us that opportunity to share in properly, not just the business of an officer directing operations and pulling his poor little ignorant privates along. He was treated as one of the team, and this made a big difference. That's what everybody was after.
We thought it was great. We thought this is a unit to be with. It's, so far apart from the rest of the way that the army was acting at that time.
The military hierarchy had authorized Stirling to raise and train his own force, but had not given him a cap. With men like Mayne, Lewis, Seekings and Bennett, however, this was no problem.
We were taken to a spot on the Suez Canal, a place called Cabrit, which was just an expanse of sand going down to the Suez Canal. And someone said, well, where's the camp? And Colonel David said, well, that's the first job you do, is to steal one. And down the bottom of the road, about 2 miles down the road, was a great big New Zealand camp, and they were up in the desert operating. And that evening we were taken down to this Kiwi camp where we stole tents, stole everything. We stole a piano, bars, tents for the officers' mess, tent for the sergeant's mess, and all the whole camp.
In November 1941, the Allies were poised to launch a major offensive against Rommel's Africa Corps. The SAS was assigned a key role. But its first mission was almost its last. The SAS's first raid was in November 1941 in support of Operation Crusader, the British offensive against Rommel. They would parachute behind the lines, attacking airfields to wipe out Axis air superiority. Then they would be picked up at a desert rendezvous by men of the Long Range Desert Group. The LRDG was an elite reconnaissance unit established in 1940 by Major Ralph Bagnold, seen here on the right. Their role was to drive deep behind enemy lines to gather vital intelligence. Their Chevrolet trucks were equipped with enough fuel, weapons and rations to last 3 weeks and cover 1,200 miles of desert. The first were commandeered from the Egyptian army and the local Chevrolet dealer. The LRDG's main aim was information gathering, but they also made the most of opportunities to hit lightly defended Axis positions. As his brainchild prepared for its first mission, Stirling still had enemies at Middle East HQ who didn't want him or the SAS to succeed. When a massive sandstorm blew up, the hierarchy gave Stirling the chance to abort his mission. Sterling appeared to be in a quandary. If the SAS didn't go, his enemies would have the chance to disband it. If it parachuted into the storm, however, most of the men would probably not survive. For the original members of the SAS, there was only one decision to make.
When the first job came up, in spite of all this rough weather and rough conditions, everybody wanted to jump. They insisted. The men insisted they got to drop. Otherwise, if it cancelled, that was us finished. We'd had enough. We was trying to get away from this cancellation all the time. There's nothing worse than to build yourself up for an operation and it's cancelled. We wanted to get in. And rightly, the people that turned around must probably in posterity and say we should never have dropped under those conditions. But if we hadn't, there would never have been an SAS, that is for sure.
But everyone considered it a suicide mission.
That evening we were given a meal. It was out of this world. The RAF had laid it on. And it was like the Last Supper, because what went through my mind, what a beautiful meal this is, you know, and what's it in aid of? I think the RAF thought they'd never see any of us again, you know. Well, then we took off for the operation at Tamimi and Gazala, and terrible wind started coming up, and the pilot, apparently I wasn't on Colonel Stern's plane, I was along with Paddy May. The pilot said that it was very, very dodgy, and should he call it off? And Colonel David said no, certainly not.
The mission was a disaster. The 65 men parachuted into the heart of the storm. They were widely scattered and far from their targets.
Of course, a lot of the containers had gone missing, so we were very short of Lewis bombs, water, everything else.
Less than a third of the men made it to the desert rendezvous. The rest were killed or captured.
We were absolutely choked, you know, that only about 21 had got back from the original crowd. And I thought personally that it would be sort of the finish of the L detachment.
David Sterling made it, Paddy Mayne made it, so did Jock Lewis, Bob Bennett and Reg Seekings. As they waited at the rendezvous with the long-range desert group, Sterling talked to this man, Captain David Lloyd Owen. Gradually, an idea began to evolve. Parachuting hadn't worked. But if LRDG patrols could collect the SAS after an operation far behind enemy lines, why couldn't they take it in?
In meeting the LRDG, they picked us up. And everybody's, well, crikey, if these people can penetrate this far, why the hell take all the risk and trouble and jeopardize the operation by drop by paratroop? And why not get them to carry us in?
The LRDG took the remnants of the SAS back to Siwa Oasis, and there fortune smiled on Sterling the Gambler. Initially, Operation Crusader went well, but then the advancing troops were outflanked by the Desert Fox, Rommel, and a fierce tank battle ensued, which brought the offensive to a standstill. Nobody had time to worry about the fate of such a small group as L Detachment, SAS. David Sterling seized his opportunity to save his fledgling unit. He hid the remnants of the SAS with a Scottish battalion. They begged, borrowed and stole more gear. It was just what veterans like Reg Seekings wanted to hear.
We'd lost 2/3 of our men on the first job, all good men, lost them through no fault of their own. And I think we all felt that we owed it to them to really make something of it. And so this tremendous pride grew up, particularly when they gave us the option of either wearing our wings on the breast, or that's if we waited until we come back off an operation, or we could put them on a shoulder immediately. So we all opted that we'd wait and come back from the operation, if we came back, and then we'd wear the wings on our breasts. And the mere fact that only a third of us, roughly a third of us, came back, you can imagine the value that was placed upon these wings.
In December 1941, the LRDG took Stirling and the handful of SAS survivors back into the desert, but totally unofficially. Stirling and Mayne led 2 SAS raids on Axis airfields at Sirte and Tamet. At Sirte, Stirling found the airfield abandoned. But at Tamet, Mayne had much more luck. The result was to become an SAS legend. Mayne and his men planted bombs on the aircraft, using the highly effective incendiaries invented by Jock Lewis.
We were only using 20-minute time pencils, and these weren't efficient enough because we were still on the airfield when they started going up. And as I say, when they went up, they went, and we had great big volumes of flame.
When their bombs ran out, Mayne climbed into the cockpit of one aircraft and personally smashed the controls, wrenching away the instrument panel as a souvenir. Another simultaneous SAS raid on Agadabia airfield, led by Lieutenant Bill Fraser, was even more successful.
That's when it all started. That's when the results started coming in. And from that first series of operations with these small parties of the 21 people, Bill Fraser's party got the biggest bag. They got 37 planes on an airfield. Paddy Mayne, I think, got 24.
Further raids brought the total to 97, but at a dreadful cost. Returning from one operation, Jock Lewis's column was attacked by enemy aircraft, and Lewis was killed. Despite this tragedy, Stirling's gamble had worked. Against all the odds, the SAS had survived its first few months. Its soldiers celebrated Christmas 1941 with roasted gazelle, washed down with rum and lime. But after a brief rest, they faced even tougher challenges. The new year would see a revolution in the way they fought. It would bring more victories, but it would also demand more sacrifices.